Life had a rhythm to it. Or at least, I thought it did. Emma and I had been married for 9 years, together for 11. We had built a life that felt steady, predictable even. I went to work at the factory during the day, she taught third graders at the local elementary school, and we spent evenings juggling dinner, homework with our 8-year-old daughter, and the occasional TV binge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Solid. Or so I believed. It started with something small, something so insignificant I almost didn't notice. Emma forgot our weekly grocery list. Normally, she had it written out to the letter, organized by aisle. She was proud of her efficiency. But this time, she looked up from her phone, distracted, and said, "Oh, I'll just pick things up on my way back." I paused. "On your way back from where?" She hesitated, then smiled. "From Sarah's." She wanted to catch up. "Didn't you see her last week?" I asked, more curious than concerned. Emma shrugged, a little too casually. "Yeah, but she said she needed some advice." "I'll just be an hour or two." I nodded, letting it go. It wasn't unusual for Emma to meet Sarah, they'd been close since college. But the way she avoided my eyes as she grabbed her bag, that stuck with me. That night, after Emma came back, I asked how Sarah was. She gave me a quick rundown of their conversation, but something about the way she spoke felt rehearsed. Polished, even. I brushed it off. Everyone has off days. Maybe I was imagining things. But then it happened again. And again. Emma started slipping out more often, claiming she was meeting Sarah, going to late school meetings, or running errands that seemed to take twice as long as they should. The rhythm of our life, the steady, predictable beat, was starting to falter. The real shift came one Saturday. Emma had always been content with the way she looked, beautiful in her simplicity, never needing to dress up unless the occasion called for it. But that day, she stood in front of the mirror for far longer than usual. She tried on 3 outfits before settling on one, touched up her makeup twice, and added perfume she usually reserved for date nights. "Wow," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You look amazing. What's the occasion?" She glanced at me, her smile tight. "Nothing special. Just thought I'd put in a little extra effort." "For grocery shopping?" I teased, raising an eyebrow. Emma laughed, but it sounded forced. "A girl likes to feel good about herself, you know." I nodded, still smiling, but something in my gut twisted. Emma was right, there was nothing wrong with wanting to feel good. But the way she grabbed her phone and tucked it into her bag like it was her lifeline. That felt different. A week later, while Emma was out, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was unusual for her to leave it behind, and I didn't think much of it until the screen lit up again. A name flashed across the screen, Ben. I froze, my hand hovering over the phone. Ben wasn't a name I recognized, not one of her coworkers, not someone from her family. Just, Ben. Before I could decide whether to answer, the screen went dark. The phone buzzed again moments later, this time with a text. "Let me know when you're free." Last time was incredible. The knot in my stomach tightened, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I stared at the message, the words searing into my brain. What, last time? And who the hell was Ben? I couldn't get the text out of my head. The words, "last time was incredible," played on a loop, twisting my thoughts into knots. Who was Ben? What had been incredible? And why was Emma so secretive about it? When she came home that evening, I watched her carefully, trying to see if there was anything different about her. She smiled as she walked through the door, dropping her bag onto the counter. "Hey," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "How about yours?" "Busy," she said, grabbing a glass of water. The grocery store was packed. Took me forever to get through the line. I nodded, my eyes narrowing slightly. Did you run into anyone you know? No, just the usual, she said casually, sipping her water. Why? Just curious, I said, watching her closely. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. But that only made the pit in my stomach grow. Emma was always a terrible liar, yet she seemed confident. Over the next few days, I kept my observations to myself, biding my time while I gathered more information. Emma's behavior didn't change much, if anything, she seemed more relaxed, more at ease. But I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Her phone was always with her now, even when she went to the bathroom or stepped out to take a call. She'd started dressing up more, even for errands, and she seemed to spend more time texting when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. After all, we'd been married for 9 years. Emma wasn't the type to cheat. She wasn't, was she? The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Sarah called me one evening, something she rarely did. I stepped outside to take the call, the cool night air biting at my skin. "Hey, Chris," Sarah said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I said. "What's up?" There was a pause on the other end. "I just wanted to check in about Emma," she said hesitantly. "I haven't seen her in weeks, and I wanted to make sure everything's okay." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "She hasn't been meeting up with you?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "She keeps saying she's busy with work or family stuff. I figured she just needed space, but, I don't know. Something feels off." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally. I'll talk to her." "Chris," Sarah said softly, "if something's going on, I'm here. You don't have to deal with it alone." I thanked her again and hung up, the weight of her words settling over me like a lead blanket. Emma wasn't just lying to me, she was lying to Sarah too. The next evening, I decided to test the waters. Emma was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when I sat down beside her. "How's Sarah?" I asked casually. Emma glanced up, her expression briefly startled. "She's fine," she said quickly. "Why?" "I was just wondering," I said. "You've been seeing her a lot lately. I figured you'd have updates." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. It was only for a second, but it was enough. She recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Oh, nothing new. Same old, same old." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But in that moment, I knew. Emma wasn't just hiding something, she was lying straight to my face. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I stayed up late, scrolling through my own thoughts. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. I needed proof, something undeniable. The next day, I set my plan in motion. I told Emma I'd be working late, but instead, I parked a few streets away from the house and waited. Sure enough, an hour after I left, she walked out the door, dressed up and holding her phone like it was her lifeline. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove across town, finally pulling into the parking lot of a small cafe. I watched as she stepped inside, glancing around nervously before heading to a table in the corner. And there he was. Ben. He stood as she approached, a charming smile on his face. They hugged briefly before sitting down, their conversation animated and intimate. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The way they leaned toward each other, the way she laughed at his jokes, it was all I needed to see. Sitting in my car, watching Emma laugh and lean toward Ben, was like being hit with a tidal wave I hadn't prepared for. My chest tightened, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The woman I had trusted with my life, the mother of my child, was here, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world, with a man I didn't even know existed. I wanted to storm into the cafe, confront them both, and demand answers. But what good would that do? Emma would spin some story, Ben might even deny everything, and I'd be left angrier and none the wiser. No, I needed to be smart. I needed proof. When Emma came home later that night, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. She walked in, her face flushed, and immediately started fidgeting with her bag. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You're home early." "Yeah," I said, glancing at her briefly before turning back to the screen. Things wrapped up quicker than I expected. She hesitated, then nodded. "That's good. I'm going to take a quick shower." I watched her retreat upstairs, her steps quicker than usual. She didn't even sit down or ask about my day, something she used to do without fail. The cracks in her facade were widening, and I was determined to break through them. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I kept track of her errands, her late nights, and the time she spent on her phone. Every pattern pointed to one undeniable conclusion: she wasn't just seeing Ben occasionally. This was ongoing, deliberate, and premeditated. One evening, while she was in the shower, I finally worked up the nerve to check her phone again. I knew her passcode, it hadn't changed in years, and when the screen unlocked, my suspicions were confirmed. Their messages were all there: playful banter, compliments, plans to meet up. But it was one message in particular that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you think he knows?" I stared at the words, my heart pounding. The response from Emma was equally damning. "No. He doesn't suspect a thing." The next evening, I decided it was time to confront her, at least partially. I wasn't ready to lay all my cards on the table, but I wanted to see how far she'd go to keep up the charade. Over dinner, I asked casually, "How's Sarah? Haven't heard you mention her much lately." Emma froze for a split second, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh, she's fine," she said quickly. "We've just both been busy, you know how it is." "Busy with what?" I pressed. "You've been seeing her almost every week, haven't you?" Her eyes flickered with something: panic, guilt, before she forced a laugh. "Yeah, we've just been catching up, nothing special." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But inside, I felt like I was watching a stranger. This wasn't the woman I had married. This was someone I didn't know, someone who could lie to my face without a second thought. The next time Emma said she was meeting Sarah, I followed her again. This time, she drove to a park on the outskirts of town, where Ben was waiting for her near a secluded bench. They sat close, their heads tilted toward each other as they talked. At one point, he reached out and touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. I snapped a photo from a distance, my hands trembling. This was the proof I needed. There was no explaining this away, no plausible excuse she could give. She was cheating, and she was doing it openly enough that she clearly thought I'd never find out. When Emma came home that night, I was waiting for her in the living room. She walked in, humming softly, and froze when she saw me sitting there. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious. "You're up late." "I couldn't sleep," I said evenly. "Where were you?" Her smile faltered. "I told you, I was with Sarah." "Really?" I said, standing. "Because I drove by the park tonight." "Funny, I didn't see Sarah there." "But I did see you. And Ben." Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Chris, I can explain." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this. I've seen the messages, Emma. I know what's been going on." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Because you did." Emma sank into the armchair across from me, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. The confident facade she had worn for weeks had crumbled, replaced by a mixture of fear and shame. "Chris, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Let me explain." I leaned forward, my jaw tight. "Explain what?" "That you've been sneaking around with another man while lying to my face. That you've been betraying me, betraying our family." "Go ahead, Emma. Explain." Her lips quivered as she opened and closed her mouth, searching for words. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered finally. "It just happened. It just happened." I repeated, my voice rising. "Don't give me that. People don't just fall into affairs, Emma. You made choices, deliberate, conscious choices." Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head in her hands. "I know," she sobbed. "I know I messed up. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "How long?" I demanded, my voice cold. "How long have you been seeing him?" She hesitated, then whispered, 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. The weight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as I tried to process what she'd just admitted. "Why?" I asked, my voice raw. "Why would you do this to me? To us?" Emma sniffed, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I was lonely. You've been so focused on work, on the bills, on everything else. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, my chest tightening. "Emma, I've been here. Every day, I've been here, trying to give us a good life. And this is how you repay me?" The conversation spiraled from there, each word cutting deeper than the last. Emma tried to justify her actions, to explain the void she felt in our relationship, but none of it mattered. Nothing could undo the betrayal. "I thought we were happy," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I thought we were building something together." "We were," she said quickly. "We are. Chris, I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't do this to someone you love." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The woman sitting before me was a stranger who had taken the life we'd built and shattered it. After hours of back and forth, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out, ignoring Emma's pleas for me to stay. Driving aimlessly through the empty streets, I felt like a volcano ready to erupt. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, it was all too much. Eventually, I ended up at Jason's house. He opened the door, his face creased with concern. "Chris. What's going on?" I stepped inside, my shoulders slumping. "She's been cheating," I said flatly. Jason's eyes widened. "Emma? Are you serious?" I nodded, collapsing onto his couch. 6 months. 6 damn months, Jason. And I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. Jason sat beside me, his expression grim. "I'm sorry, man. I don't even know what to say." "There's nothing to say," I muttered. "She destroyed everything." The next day, I returned home to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up as I walked in, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "Chris," she began, standing. "I know I don't deserve it, but, can we talk?" I stared at her, my emotions still raw. "Talk about what?" "How you lied to me. How you brought another man into our lives while pretending everything was fine." "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I shook my head, bitterness rising in my throat. "You don't just get to say sorry and make this go away, Emma. Trust doesn't work like that." "I know," she said quickly. "But I'll do the work. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just, don't give up on us." Don't give up on our family." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hope that we could find a way forward. But another part, the part that remembered the texts, the meetings, the lies, wasn't sure if that was possible. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. Could I forgive her? Did I even want to try? Or was it better to walk away and start over? One thing was certain, whatever choice I made, it would change everything. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Emma's words echoed in my mind, her promises to change, to rebuild what she had destroyed. But could I believe her? Could I trust her again after everything she had done? The kids, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in our marriage, went about their days as usual. Ben asked me to help him with his science project, and Katie begged for extra bedtime stories. Their innocence was a painful reminder of what was at stake. I needed clarity, but it felt like I was drowning in questions without answers. After several sleepless nights, I decided to meet with a counselor on my own. Emma had suggested couples therapy, but I wasn't ready for that. First, I needed to sort through my own emotions. Dr. Harper, the counselor, was a calm, steady presence. She listened as I poured out my anger, my sadness, my confusion. "Trust is like a fragile vase," she said during our first session. "Once it's shattered, you can try to glue the pieces back together, but it will never look the same. The question is, can you live with the cracks?" Her words stayed with me. Could I accept a version of my marriage that was forever altered? Could I let go of the bitterness that threatened to consume me? Meanwhile, Emma was doing everything she could to prove she was serious about fixing things. She stopped going out, kept her phone unlocked and accessible, and initiated open conversations about our relationship. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she said one evening as we sat in the living room. "But I want you to know I'm committed to earning back your trust, no matter how long it takes." Her sincerity was obvious, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and I wasn't sure if it could be rebuilt at all. One evening, I met up with Jason at our favorite bar. He had been my sounding board throughout this ordeal, offering advice without judgment. "Man, this is tearing you up," he said after I shared my latest thoughts. "Have you thought about what you really want?" "Every damn day," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "But no matter which way I look at it, someone gets hurt. Either I stay and risk resenting her forever, or I leave and break up our family." Jason nodded, his expression serious. "You've got to do what's right for you and the kids. But whatever you decide, don't let anger make the choice for you. Think about what's best in the long run." That weekend, Ben and I worked on his science project together. As we assembled a makeshift volcano in the kitchen, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, why have you and Mom been so quiet lately?" he asked. I froze, my hands gripping the glue gun. "What do you mean?" "You don't laugh as much," he said. "And you're not hugging her like you used to." My chest tightened, the weight of his observation hitting me hard. "Sometimes grown-ups go through hard times," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens, your mom and I both love you and your sister very much." Ben nodded, seeming to accept the answer. But his words stayed with me, a reminder of how deeply this decision would affect our kids. That night, as Emma and I sat across from each other in the kitchen, I knew it was time to address the elephant in the room. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I began. Emma looked up, her expression hopeful but wary. "And?" "I'm willing to try," I said, the words tasting both foreign and familiar. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. And if I feel like it's not working, I'm not going to force it for the sake of appearances." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll do everything I can to make this right." We agreed to start with counseling, this time as a couple. It was a small step, but it felt significant, a way to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The first counseling session together was tense. Emma sat on one side of the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while I sat on the other, arms crossed. Dr. Harper, seated between us, began with the basics. Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest challenges any couple can face, she said, her voice calm and steady. But it starts with honesty and communication. Both of you need to be willing to address the pain and the issues that led to this point. I looked at Emma, her eyes downcast. I wanted to believe she was here for the right reasons, but doubt lingered like a shadow. Chris, Dr. Harper said, drawing my attention. What's your biggest fear moving forward? I hesitated, then said, that this will happen again. That I'll put in the effort, try to forgive, and end up right back here. Emma flinched at my words, her face crumpling. It won't, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I swear to you, Chris. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that. Dr. Harper nodded, her gaze moving between us. It's a valid fear, Chris. And it's going to take time for Emma to show through her actions that she's committed to change. Emma, what about you? What's your biggest fear? That he won't be able to forgive me, she said softly. That no matter how hard I try, I'll never be able to make things right. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. After that session, things between us started to shift. It wasn't an overnight transformation, far from it. But there was a newfound openness in our conversations. Emma didn't shy away from my questions anymore, and I didn't bury my anger beneath forced smiles. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, we sat on the couch together for the first time in weeks. The silence between us was tentative but not hostile. Do you ever think about what went wrong? Emma asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. All the time, I admitted. But thinking about it doesn't change the fact that you made a choice. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I wish I could go back and fix it. You can't, I said bluntly. But maybe we can figure out how to move forward. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw hope in her eyes. As the weeks went on, we began to find moments of normalcy again. One Saturday, we took the kids to a local carnival. Watching Ben and Katie laugh as they rode the Ferris wheel, Emma reached for my hand. I hesitated, then let her fingers lace through mine. It felt strange at first, like trying on a pair of old shoes that no longer fit quite the same. But as the day went on, I realized that the small gesture had softened something inside me. That night, as we tucked the kids into bed, Emma whispered, "Thank you. For today." I didn't respond, but I nodded, my heart feeling a little lighter. Of course, not everything was smooth. There were still moments when my anger bubbled to the surface, when a comment or a glance reminded me of the betrayal. One night, during a disagreement about finances, I snapped, "Maybe if you'd been this invested in us 6 months ago, we wouldn't be here." Emma's face crumpled, and she walked out of the room without a word. I knew I'd gone too far, but part of me felt justified. Trust was fragile, and every misstep felt like a threat to the tenuous progress we'd made. Later that night, I found her sitting on the porch, her arms wrapped around her knees. "I'm sorry," I said, sitting beside her. "I shouldn't have said that." She looked at me, her eyes red. "I deserve it," she said simply. "But I hope one day, you won't feel like you have to punish me anymore." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they were a reflection of the bitterness I hadn't yet let go. During our next counseling session, Dr. Harper asked us to write letters to each other. "Sometimes, it's easier to express your feelings on paper," she said. "I want you to be honest, but also kind." I spent hours on mine, trying to find the right balance between anger and hope. When the time came to share, my hands trembled as I read it aloud. "Emma," I began, "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why you did what you did. It shattered me in ways I didn't think were possible. But despite everything, I still see the woman I fell in love with, the woman who made me laugh, who stood by me when things were hard, who gave me 2 incredible kids. I don't know if we can get back to that place, but I'm willing to try." When I finished, Emma was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." Her letter was equally emotional, filled with apologies and promises to rebuild. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page. The letters we shared in therapy marked a turning point, but the road ahead was anything but smooth. Trust, Dr. Harper had said, is rebuilt in inches, not miles. And every inch felt like a battle. One evening, Emma came home a little later than usual. She had texted earlier, saying she'd stopped to help a coworker with a project. I nodded when she told me, but my chest tightened. "Did you eat already?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Yeah," she said, setting her bag down. "Sorry, I should have let you know." Her explanation was reasonable, her demeanor casual, but my mind raced. The old paranoia crept in, whispering questions I hated even thinking. Was she lying? Was she with someone else? That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Emma's breathing was steady beside me, and for the first time in weeks, I forced myself to let go of the doubt. If I was going to give her a chance, I couldn't scrutinize every detail. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The next weekend, we planned a family outing to the zoo. It was the kind of thing we hadn't done in what felt like forever, a day filled with laughter, animal encounters, and overpriced snacks. Watching Ben and Katie marvel at the giraffes, I felt a pang of guilt for how much they had endured without knowing. At one point, Ben tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, look! The penguins!" I laughed, following him to the exhibit. Behind me, I caught Emma watching us, her expression soft. When our eyes met, she smiled, a real smile, not the guarded ones I'd grown used to. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe we could find our way back, little by little. That hope was tested not long after. While sorting through some old receipts, I came across one from a restaurant, the same one where I'd seen Emma meet Ben. My chest tightened as I stared at the date. It was from 6 months ago, right around the time the affair had started. I stormed into the living room, the receipt clenched in my hand. "Explain this," I said, holding it up. Emma froze, her face paling. "Chris, Don't," I snapped. "Just tell me the truth. Were you with him that night?" Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. "Yes." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. "Do you have any idea how hard I'm trying to move past this?" I said, my voice trembling. "And then I find this, just sitting there like a reminder of everything you destroyed." "I didn't know it was there," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I swear, Chris, it wasn't intentional. I thought I'd gotten rid of everything." "That's the problem," I said bitterly. "You shouldn't have had anything to get rid of in the first place." The next counseling session was tense. I told Dr. Harper about the receipt, about how it had dredged up everything I was trying to let go of. "It's normal for triggers to set you back," Dr. Harper said gently. "Healing isn't linear. But the fact that you're here, talking about it, shows that you're committed to working through it." "I'm trying," I said, my voice raw. "But it feels like every time I take a step forward, something pulls me back." Emma reached for my hand, her touch tentative. "I know I can't undo the past," she said softly. "But I'm here, Chris. I'm not giving up on us." Her words were sincere, but sincerity didn't erase the pain. It was a start, though, a reminder that we were still in this together, even when it felt impossible. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on the present. Emma continued to show her commitment, through her actions, not just her words. She scheduled more counseling sessions, planned family activities, and went out of her way to be transparent about everything. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Emma turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. "No," I said honestly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we can build something better." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I'd like that." The nights grew quieter, the anger and pain slowly giving way to something softer. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in that direction. I still had doubts, still felt the sting of betrayal, but I also felt a glimmer of hope. We weren't where we wanted to be, but we weren't where we had been. And for now, that was enough. The weeks turned into months, and while the wounds of Emma's betrayal hadn't disappeared, they had begun to scab over. Our counseling sessions continued, each one peeling back another layer of pain and uncertainty. We were far from healed, but there was progress, slow, tentative progress. One evening, as we sat on the porch after dinner, Emma surprised me by breaking the silence. "Chris," she began, her voice cautious, "I've been thinking about something Dr. Harper said." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "She talked about forgiveness," Emma said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not just you forgiving me, but me forgiving myself." I didn't say anything right away, letting her words sink in. She continued, her voice trembling. "I know I broke your trust. And I know it'll take time to rebuild. But I can't keep hating myself if I want to help us move forward." Her honesty caught me off guard. Emma had always been quick to deflect or minimize her feelings, but this was different. She was owning her pain, and mine too. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I admitted. "But I think you're right. You can't keep beating yourself up forever." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something resembling peace. One weekend, we decided to take the kids camping, a trip we'd been putting off for years. As we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, I felt a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in a long time. Ben leaned against me, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Dad, I like when we all hang out together like this," he said softly. "Me too, buddy," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Emma glanced at me across the fire, her expression soft. It was a moment, a small, fleeting moment, but it felt like a step forward. Not everything was smooth, of course. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the anger bubbled to the surface. One night, during an argument over something trivial, I blurted out, "Maybe if you'd been this honest a year ago, we wouldn't be here." Emma froze, her face crumpling. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I messed up. But I'm here now, Chris. I'm trying." Her words diffused the argument, leaving me feeling both guilty and relieved. I realized then that holding on to my anger wasn't helping either of us. If I wanted to move forward, I had to start letting go. The breakthrough came during another counseling session. Dr. Harper asked us to share what we appreciated about each other, a daunting task given everything we've been through. "I appreciate how much you've been trying," I said, my voice hesitant but sincere. "I see it. And I know it's not easy." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I appreciate that you're still here," she said softly. "That you're giving us a chance, even when I don't deserve it." The room fell silent, the weight of our words hanging in the air. For the first time, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in months, forgiveness. Over time, those moments of forgiveness grew more frequent. Emma continued to show her commitment, not just through words but through actions. She was patient with my anger, open about her own struggles, and relentless in her efforts to rebuild our family. I wasn't naive, I knew things would never go back to the way they were. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the cracks in our marriage didn't have to be weaknesses. Maybe they could be reminders of what we'd overcome. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Emma reached for my hand. "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I thought about her question, about everything we'd been through, and nodded. "I think we already are. Or at least, we're getting there." Her smile was small but genuine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same team again. Months later, as I watched Ben and Katie play in the yard, I realized how far we'd come. The road to healing hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. But we were still here, together, fighting for what mattered. Emma walked up beside me, her hand brushing against mine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how lucky we are," I said, surprising even myself with the truth of the words. She smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I feel the same way." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her.